Thanks. Good to see everybody. For those of you who were here last year, I gave a talk on pro formas and how to think about building multiplexes in the city of Toronto. I thought just, Chris sort of introduced it as like building a development business. I thought maybe more interesting would be a little bit of a story of our business, how we got started, the things we sort of did trial and error in to land on what we're doing now. So for those of you who don't know us, we're Toronto Standard. We're three partners. My other partner, whose name is also Chris, is somewhere here in the room as well. There's 5 of us on the team in total, and we're effectively building. We can jump to the next slide, or do I have to push a button? Here, I'll do it. We're building long-term rental housing that we want to, buy, develop, build, and own ourselves with partners along the way. We started looking at this at the time that the multiplex policies were sort of new in the city. We got started with a couple of multiplex projects, realized that we loved the product type, but if we wanted to do this as a full-time operating business, we probably needed a little bit beefier deals. Naturally, and the timing sort of coincided with the major streets policy was being circulated around the city. And then ultimately now we're looking at more mid-rise on avenues that I'll show you some of the projects we're working on. But if we rewind about 5 years, we were dabbling in this space, I'll say. We were all working in other industries, working on other businesses, and hobbyists on the side of our desks looking at deals in the real estate space. When we started looking at why we wanted to start a real estate development business, it was pretty straightforward. We're 3 young partners with young families, and we're looking at how do we build a portfolio that we can ultimately give to our grandkids. A couple of things happened over the last 2 or 3 years that really piqued our interest in the rental model. So, we've talked about this all day. Many of you know this, and it's the reason that you're in this space. But there was a lot of sort of subsequent policy changes that happened at the federal government's level, things like HST exemptions on rental housing, provincial government, things like rent control being eliminated after 2018, naturally municipally policies that Ben was just referencing, the major streets policy, the EHON initiative, the avenues expansion. All of these things started moving in a direction where projects that would not have been realistic or feasible 2 years ago were starting to become feasible. We had never built a development business before. We had, previously built different types of companies, and mostly in the tech space. But we figured, hey, this can't be rocket science. We could do it. We could figure it out. And so we started doing some trial and error. We did a few things before we got to the scale and sort of product type that we're focusing on now. So as I mentioned, my third partner, Chris Lawson, who, if he's in the room, he'll wave and you can pull him aside, started building multiplexes, let's say, before they were cool, before the multiplex bylaw was a thing. A couple of projects that he built over the course of the last 5 years or so, an 8-plex on the left, actually 2 4-plexes that are sort of like squeezed together with about an inch or 2 apart between the 2 brick walls. A triplex with a garden suite in the back, and a project we just completed recently. Our first project as a team with our partner Anandan as well, a 6-plex on a net in the West End. We liked this model. We know there's a lot of policy to encourage more of this in the city, but we were looking at, hey, how do we turn this into a business model that pays us sufficient fees so that we can actually earn a living doing this, and ultimately generates enough equity value that we could, build a meaningful portfolio. And the more we started thinking about that, we realized, hey, going 4 units at a time or 5 units at a time was probably not going to get us to the outcome we wanted to get to fast enough. In parallel to this, we were also working at the complete opposite end of the spectrum. We were doing high-rise land assemblies, let's say, until they weren't cool. The high-rise market has obviously imploded, but we would buy, tie up, or in some cases rezone high-rise land and then turn around and look to sell it. The project on the left is a 7-house assembly that we worked on back in 2020, 2021 near the Mount Dennis LRT station. Ultimately sold that site. The project in the middle is one that we're still rezoning down at Lakeshore. We're getting pretty close to the completion of our zoning bylaw amendment and official plan amendment being completed. This is at the Long Branch GO train station, a site that we'll ultimately look to sell. And then the project on the right, another assembly that we're working on near the Glencairn subway station. I highlight these just because, we were on the very, very small end of the scale and on the very, very large end of the scale to realize that we thought the opportunity was probably somewhere in the middle, where we landed on sort of this higher end of the missing middle scale. We still have a couple of these sites in our portfolio that we're still working with in various forms, including entitlements. But ultimately, we triangulated between high-rise and multiplexes to our current niche, which is, this is probably the smallest building that we're currently working on, a 4-story, 14-unit apartment building beside the Glencairn subway station. This one actually started as a piece of land we bought in an attempt to assemble a 40-story high-rise. We thought, hey, we buy one or two of the neighbors, and then ultimately we've got a great site beside the subway station. As we went through the process, we started realizing that high-rise developers were starting to get cold feet on the state of the condo market. You know, there just wasn't as much appetite, but we had bought a piece of land that was really, really well located and that could fit a pretty interesting walk-up apartment building. So something that we're actually moving forward and getting into construction on this year. And then our sweet spot that Ben mentioned, 2 projects that we're working on with him, in fact, is both the major streets policy as well as the expanded avenues and relaxed mid-rise design guidelines that allow for, let's say, a new type of massing in new parts of the city that weren't previously permitted. This is probably as stereotypical as you can think of what a major street building could look like and will look like in the city of Toronto. We'll start construction on this building in Q4 of this year. This is previously 2 single-family homes on Kipling Avenue, about 3 blocks north of Bloor, if you know that part of the city in Etobicoke, that we are going to build what is actually a 7-story building. The 7th floor here is sort of tucked in the back because it's stepped back, 46 units. But this is as close to an as-of-right build as you know we have in our portfolio. We're going to go to committee of adjustment with this building to seek slightly smaller setbacks, slightly more height. But even if we went with the as-of-right permissions, we could build this sort of as-of-right, as of buying the land. This is our first project. We tied up this site in 2023. I'll say the timelines for the policy to change. For those of you who have been following this policy, you know there's been an OLT appeal that sort of slowed down this policy, and we recently just got word that we're being scoped out of the appeal. This one has been a longer process to get to, you know, what will ultimately be site plan approval and construction. But now we know that this model works and frankly could work a lot faster our second time around. So this will be, call it our first proof of concept as it comes out of the ground. Very simple 6-story box with punch windows and Juliet balconies, something we think we can build quickly, efficiently, call it cheaply or affordably. And we'll have this thing completed in about 14 to 15 months by the time shovels go into ground. And we'd like to find more sites like this. To give you a sense of dimensions, this is an 88-foot by 150-foot lot between the 2 properties that we assembled. And you know, we know there's few and far between places in the city where you could buy 88 feet by only assembling 2 houses. But in Etobicoke, you can find lots that size, and perhaps in Scarborough and a few other places as well. So this one, I'll say, is probably the simplest thing that we could envision doing over the course of the next few years. The next project that we have on our plate right now that is really exciting us is within the new avenues expansion. So I don't think this was talked about deeply today. I know, you know, people have referenced it, but part of the city's work to expand the available sites in the city to build mid-rises is they've looked at expanding the designated avenues in the city. This is on Dufferin, north of DuPont, which today is not, well, actually, as of 3 months ago, was not an avenue. Recently was added to the avenues map, which means we can build mid-rise on a stretch of Dufferin that wouldn't have previously permitted it. Still requires that we go through a zoning bylaw amendment, but this is a mixed-use zone. You'll notice it's a relatively tight site. This is a 45-foot wide site, but uniquely 170 feet deep, backing onto a laneway. The massing has changed a little bit, but one thing you can see in the rendering is sort of a central gap between the front and rear of the massing. It'll look a little bit different in our final design, but effectively we're introducing a courtyard into the middle of the building to permit windows to go interior so we can have primary windows facing the lane, primary windows facing the street, and primary windows facing into the courtyard. I took some some notes from that presentation that we heard earlier about Impossible Toronto. I think this is probably as close as you can get to building courtyards in the city without reimagining entire blocks, but a very cool configuration for a lot that otherwise you'd have a hard time using the full depth of the lot. This one will probably go into construction in mid-2026, 60 units across 8 stories. The rendering here only shows 7, so it's gotten a story taller. The city, for what it's worth, although we have to go through a zoning bylaw amendment, is incredibly supportive of this. So we have to factor in the timeline for entitlements versus our Kipling site, where now we could go as of right. we've been just getting very, very positive feedback from the city on this scale of development. So if you're intimidated by going from like as of right major streets into something that requires a zoning bylaw amendment, just know that there are many parts of the city where this is exactly what they want to see. They might fight you tooth and nail for a 40-story tower, but they welcome intelligent, sort of like curated 6 to 8 story designs in the right parts of the city. I should say, backing up a second, to give you a sense of how we've built this business, like we don't come at this with a massive amount of capital ourselves. We figured, hey, the one thing we could do is we could find great sites, we could build a great operating team, and we can execute on deals, but ultimately we're gonna have to go out and find investors or partners to do every one of these deals, and that's what we started hitting the pavement on last year when we sort of formed the business, was like, hey, how do we finance something like this? On our first project, without getting into too many details, we structured this as a co-ownership. We raised money from a syndicate of family offices that were interested in proving the concept of major streets buildings in the city. The premise being that if we can make the math work on our first one, then we could do 5 or 10 more of these very quickly thereafter with the same group of investors. And so that worked really well to get our first deal funded. Naturally, we're gonna go through CMHC for financing. This is gonna be an MLI Select sort of finance project, probably through construction and term. Our second deal, we worked with a group called Cranston Capital. We're still actively in the process of fundraising on this deal, but Cranston is effectively an exempt market dealer that pools capital from smaller LPs to be able to allocate to deals like this. And so Cranston is fundraising for us on this deal. Similar structure in the sense that we're operating as the developer, we're earning upside in the long-term equity value of the building, and we're earning fees along the way for managing the development process. So, balancing act for us when we were building this business is, hey, we need to be able to feed ourselves. So how do we make money on a monthly basis to pay rent and have salaries? But we also want to be building a portfolio long-term that actually sort of accrues equity value. And we found this sort of sweet spot works pretty well. We're in a building like this, to give you like very ballpark numbers, this might cost us about $24–25 million to build, but we project it's probably worth about $32 or $33 million once complete. We don't intend to sell the building, but effectively at that point, we crystallize a larger share of ownership in the building than our percentage of equity into the deal. So we might come into a deal for 10% of the equity we need, raise 90%, come out the other end owning 35 or 40% of the building over its life, and have earned fees through the development process. So a nice business model in the sense that like we can pay ourselves, modest fees along the way and then earn some equity upside in the projects, presuming they perform as we expect. So, all of this is based on like projected values. So if we can nail that model, our hope and aspiration is to be doing this a lot more across the city. We just tied up our third site with a similar sort of view in mind. This is at Davenport and Symington, give or take. Similar scale, 8 stories. I think we're actually at 59 units right now in our current sort of like very, very early preliminary designs. This one uniquely, I'd say, is our first site that has a corner lot configuration, which allows for a nice, efficient use of primary windows on 3 sides of the building as opposed to only 2. But you sort of see the pattern. We're looking at 40 to 60 units. We're looking at parts of the city where we think we can get $4.25 to $5 in average rents. On every one of our developments so far, we are doing 0 underground parking or servicing space or mechanical space. So we're doing slab on grade. Our current model calls for precast concrete, panelized cold form steel, quick, cost-efficient construction. And nothing too fancy. We're talking about very, very basic buildings that frankly would have been the norm in the city of Toronto 30 years ago that we just stopped building at some point. Hence the name Toronto Standard. So if for what it's worth, if this is sort of ringing a bell, if you have sites that you think would sort of fit this mold, we're always open to talking to folks about sites that you have. We're always looking for partners and investors on the sites that we have ongoing. But I'll tell you a little bit about how we pulled together the team. When we formed this partnership, my brother and I and our third partner, Chris, it sort of came down to like, hey, what's the division of labor? Who's responsible for what? What skills do we bring to the table? And what are we missing to be able to actually build an operating business out of this development platform of ours? So without sort of belaboring our backgrounds, briefly, Chris, who you guys have all met, his background is mostly in development management and entitlements. My other partner, Chris, is in background in real estate acquisitions and sales and small-scale construction management, having built his own multiplex portfolio. And I come from a background as a CPA, I've raised equity and debt in different businesses and sort of been focusing on the financing side of the business. We then brought on 2 guys onto our team. One of them is wandering around the room. He's the guy who's a lot more muscular than me. Vladimir, he's our acquisition and development associate. Mostly with a view towards finding our next site. This business model only works if we're constantly looking for our next site to put into the pipeline and effectively keep ourselves busy at every stage. Always have a site in due diligence for acquisitions, always have a site in entitlements, always have a site in pre-construction, eventually always have a site in construction, and then start having sites that are in lease up. And if we continue doing this almost as an assembly line, we think we could be producing sort of dozens of these buildings over the course of the next 10 years or so. Hardik, who's not here in the room, we brought on back in October, realizing that as we scaled this business, we were taking on a lot of complexity just from an accounting perspective. Every deal was a different equity stack, debt stack, set of books, bank accounts, and we realized pretty quickly we needed to just get organized on the accounting side. And we're actually right now in the process of bringing on our 6th team member that we're still sort of finalizing some interviews for, to bring on a project manager on the construction side. So a little bit of a unique role in the sense that on one hand, we have some smaller builds that we self-perform on, where we build them ourselves, and we have some bigger builds where we work with third-party construction managers, but we want to be able to effectively oversee our construction manager and have somebody in-house who's just got the right background and capabilities to do that. This will probably be the scope of our team for the foreseeable future. We think we can do a lot with a pretty lean team. Along the way, we've learned a lot of things. We've made a lot of mistakes. If anybody's going through the process of, I know there's a lot of folks that come to this event looking at their first deal. They've just tied up their first piece of land. And a lot of these basic things seem intimidating. How do I raise money? How do I structure a deal? Who do I need to hire, et cetera? We've made a lot of those mistakes. So if we can be helpful, I think our purpose in hosting this event is just to sort of like see the industry pick up speed. So don't hesitate to come talk to us. And I'm sure there are many of you in this room that have more experience than us that we're going to be asking the same questions of. I think the beauty of this is just to be able to share experience and wisdom as we all develop it. So that's it. That's all I wanted to share today. If you've got questions, I'm happy to take answers. If you ever want to reach out and chat about deals, sites, or just generic questions about stuff you're dealing with, we're all ears and we're happy to give you our opinions at least.
Wow, that was an incredible presentation. Congrats. So our acquisition cost in Barrie per door is about $80,000 per unit. So essentially, we'll buy a lot for like $800K and put 10 units on it. Just curious, what's your range? If that's something you're willing to share. What's going on with this Major Streets initiative? Kind of heard you talk about ZBA, but why would you?
Yeah, I can clarify.
Yeah.
So to your first question, depending on location, our sites, I'll say this on a per square foot basis, range between $70 and $90 a square foot. I think in a certain context that sounds expensive. Very specifically, let's say our Kipling site, 46 units, about 35,000 square feet of GFA, $2.4 million for what would have been 2 single-family lots, so $1.2 million per lot.
That's
the way
great.
we think about it basically is that we have to pay pretty close to face value for the lot in its current condition, not much of a development premium on top of that. Although on a per square foot basis, it comes out sounding expensive. Where our model saves money is it saves money on no underground. So we'll probably save, probably $75 to $100 a square foot in construction by not going down, not going underground. And on just our method of construction being, call it $30 to $60 per square foot cheaper in construction, even above grade. So those things sort of add up. But on our Dufferin project, I think we're at about $88 a square foot. And I think on our Kipling project, we're about $72 a square foot. It is a factor of hey, what neighborhood, what rents do we think we can achieve? The configuration of the site very directly translates to average unit sizes. Our average units on Kipling are significantly larger because we're mid-block. We can't put primary windows facing the sides of the building. So all the units either face front or rear. And so, you can only design the units in a certain way effectively. But that's sort of the ballpark. And as I said, our rents, we're looking for anywhere between on Kipling, we're at about $420 a square foot on rents. ones and twos. On Dufferin, we're at about $4.95 to $5 a square foot in rents. Studios, ones and twos. The studios sort of help quite a bit on that per square foot number. Your second question on ZBA, two different policy frameworks. Major streets is moving towards an as-of-right permission. In theory, once this OLT appeal is settled, it'll be an as-of-right permission. You can go straight to site plan approval. If you want, you can go through committee of adjustment to seek minor variances. But on the avenues right now, you still have to go through a zoning bylaw amendment, and in some cases, an official plan amendment, depending on which avenue you're on and what is the lot. There are avenues like our site on Dufferin. On our side of the street, it's mixed use in the official plan. On the other side of the street, it's yellow, it's neighborhoods, right? So, if we were on the other side of the street, we'd only be able to build what we're building with an official plan amendment. And so we probably wouldn't have taken on that, let's say, entitlement risk. The city is working towards, I won't speak out of my depth here, but I know at a high level, the city is working towards, so the first thing they did is they updated the avenues map to say, hey, we want more places in the city to permit mid-rise. The next thing they're doing is an official plan amendment to then change the color on the map to say, hey, is this gonna be mixed use apartment neighborhoods or neighborhoods? And so you'll see a version of that map getting circulated probably tail end of this year. I think it's supposed to go in front of council in December. And that'll just show a lot more red in places in the city that have historically been yellow, and maybe some orange, apartment neighborhoods. And then the third phase of the city's process is once they've updated the official plan, they want to then update the zoning bylaw. Their goal, stated by the city, who knows how long this will take, is to eventually get to a point where mid-rise on avenues is also as of right, within a framework where you can still seek variances. But I think we're still a couple of years away from that. So if you're building, the simplest way to think about it is like a mixed-use site facing onto an avenue is going to need a zoning bylaw amendment for sure. A neighborhood site on a major street, good chance you can go as of right and build, and that's within a couple, who knows how long the OLT appeal will go. But there are people, Blair Scorgi's in the room, he mentioned he's working with a client that is, currently getting 7 of their projects scoped out, if I heard correctly. There is a mechanism right now to get scoped out of the OLT appeal, which means you can get to the as of right permission by going around the appeal effectively. It just requires a little bit of work with a planner and a municipal lawyer. But
so if you're acquiring right now in the neighborhoods, are you starting the SPA process directly, or are you kind of starting the ZBA? I guess it would be weird to, you know what I mean? Like there's this weird gap of like 4 or 5 months until this OLT appeal settles, right? So it wouldn't really make sense to
so we can't start SPA until, so on our Kipling project, I'll use as an example, major streets, we'll start the SPA timeline at the same time as we start the COA timeline. So we'll apply for committee of adjustment, and at the same time, we'll apply for an SPA pack. We wouldn't have been allowed to apply for an SPA pack until we were scoped out, because they won't give you that pack until your site is permitted for that intended use effectively. But those timelines can operate in parallel. There is a little bit of a risk, not really a risk, just a little bit of a cost of rework if we go through site plan with our designs that assume our variances have been approved, and then we go to committee and realize our variances did not get approved, then we have to go back and sort of amend our site plan drawings effectively. But in our context, we're talking about changing setbacks from 2.4 meters to 1.8 and adding a couple meters of height. If we didn't get those approved, our building looks substantially the same. We just sort of squeeze it in a little bit and drop some ceiling heights. Not much changes beyond that. We just get, less good ceiling heights and slightly tighter units. But that sort of parallel process requires taking a little bit of that risk if you're going to go to committee for variances.
Yeah. I'll just quickly ask one more. As you know, there was a 2 fourplexes that were denied recently on Kipling, right? That's created quite a bit of a hoopla in the developer community. So do you have any thoughts on that? Like what's happened? Like I'm trying to dissect it as well, and it kind of just looked like a case of just a bunch of, I'll call it NIMBYs, that kind of got together and stuff like that, which is strange because, why would they not allow 2 fourplexes? You know the project I'm talking about,
it was in
right?
the Toronto Star.
Yeah,
think,
exactly.
right? Yeah.
So why would they not allow 2 fourplexes and then, in 3 months,
Well,
there's going to be...
this is, Nama referenced this earlier, Nama Blunder referenced this. I mean, like the problem with the committee of adjustment process is it introduces politics into the planning process. This is we don't know yet. Nobody has taken a major streets project through committee yet. Is it a good idea to go to committee with a major streets project with variances? Is everybody in the neighborhood going to show up to kick and scream? And is committee going to be too nervous to approve what are very minor variances in nature? It might be that we learn our lesson the first time and we don't bother going to committee the second time. We just take the as of right permission and we build it. The nice thing about getting to as of right permissions, if the city can get us there, is you sort of kill the ability for neighbor input in the process. Zoning bylaw amendments still have like community consultations, and committee of adjustment still allows for voices to sort of show up. If we get more towards as of right entitlements, then we can sort of skip eventually having to get neighborhood input for a committee of adjustment or neighborhood input for a zoning bylaw amendment. It definitely creates uncertainty. I mean, the irony with that site specifically on Kipling is once this OLT appeal is cleared, they'll be able to build more than that amount of density on that site. Exactly. And I think the neighbors will end up kicking themselves because that developer is going to go back for more. They're not going to go back with a smaller build. They're going to say, okay, well, OLT appeals now settled. I can build on that exact same site. You didn't want 2 fourplexes. I'm going to build 20 units on that site. And I think that's probably the direction this is going. It's just like the process of getting there is a little bit slow and painful.
All right, thank you.
Cool. Thank you.